The daily prayer of Islam proclaims, "There is no God but God. There is no God but God." Believers of all religions could wisely include that truth as part of their daily prayers. There is no God but God. Not too long ago, a group of Buddhists were building a temple for their worship, and certain fundamentalist Christians began to object loudly to this Buddhist temple being built in their city. They objected loudly to it as pagan worship of strange gods in their own city. I find this to be a most unusual response, since the city around each of us is always crowded with temples to strange gods. Banks, corporate and government offices, casinos, ballparks, churches. Yes, churches, where the Bible, ancient traditions and dogmas, or even the hierarchy, are paid homage equally with God. We, each of us, have a vast multitude of private, household, and office temples. Our private, smaller temples include the shrines we build to the pagan gods of efficiency and perfection and success and power and glamour, and yes, even youth. For this reason, you and I, should be praying several times a day with wholehearted devotion. The very same prayer our Islamic sisters and brothers pray. There is no God but God. There is no God but God. But just one caveat to that prayer. Perhaps even more important than loving God is to make sure that we're loving, that we're worshiping the one true God, the one who is truly God. Let me be clear and say it again. More important than loving God is loving the one God, the one true God. You see, what we believe about the nature of God matters more than anything matters, because we end up becoming what we worship. We end up becoming what we worship. If that's true, then the nature of God matters even more than that we worship the one God. And if, for example, we see that God is all-powerful and in control of everything all the time, you and I will begin to seek power over others, and we will seek to continue in our controlling ways in this world, in the image and likeness of the God we worship. We will start to become more powerful and more controlling in life. We become the God we worship. That's why this matters so much. And trust me, just because someone identifies as Christian does not mean we worship the same God. What we believe about God matters more than even if I believe in God, because that is what I, Gary Braun, will become. I cannot speak to what Islam means by that word God, that symbol word God. I cannot speak to what Buddhism might mean as its analogous thought or thoughtlessness. I cannot speak to what the Hindus call their deities, or what they actually even really mean by deity. Only they have the right to speak of the images they hold sacred. I cannot really even speak to what the Jews mean by God myself, because the Hebrew Testament is full of various understandings of God. And to tell you the truth, I can't even speak to what some Christians seem to believe about the same God I say I believe in. But this I know, for us who have seen the face of God in that singular Jewish man, Jesus, we've seen that face. We know now what God is truly like. We must love the God of Jesus, and the God of Jesus alone, that Jesus himself believed in. That's the God, the one God we must worship and love with all of our hearts. And to say all of our hearts means one thing and one thing only, that there's no God but this God. There's no God except the God who is love. God is love. That means in the image and likeness of God, you and I, at our truest self, at the core of who we are, our soul of souls, is love. We are love. Therefore, we must devote our lives to love, to becoming what we worship, and not just any notion of love, but only a sense of love, that love at its best is truly self-emptying and truly self-giving. That the true lover makes of himself or herself a gift, and only a gift, to other people in their life, wherever their life is happening. This is the dynamic of love, and therefore it's the dynamic of God. Self-emptying, self-giving. Self-emptying, self-gift. Anything else is not worship of the one true God that Jesus believed in, that Jesus worshiped, that Jesus surrendered himself to. Notice what we say about God and what we don't say. When the choir just led us in the singing of the responsorial psalm, they did not say, "The Lord is judgmental and shaming, quick to judge and full of resentment. The Lord is shame." No, my gosh, we would have said that's not God. We said things like God is kind and merciful. The Lord is kind and merciful. But I wonder if we've tapped into that, if we become what we worship. I wonder sometimes what we worship. The Lord is manipulative and overpowering. I'm telling you, in the face of Jesus, in that face and in that life, we now have revealed to us what God is like. And by whatever name you believe, Islam or Buddhist or Hindu or Christian, that's the God we believe is God alone. We know now the true nature of God, and it is love. Self-emptying, self-giving love. It has taken us from the Big Bang to Jesus of Nazareth to figure this out. And if the definition of real love, gospel love, is this: to will the good of the other as other, that's the definition of love revealed in Jesus. To will the good of the other as other. Then that is who God is and what God does. God is always willing the good of the other as other. And if you get a chance later in the day to look back at the first reading, you'll start to see how true that has been, and the strain of this that has been threaded throughout our traditions as true. Can I show you what my image of God is when we are indeed co-creating with God our own lives. When God hears of our decisions, here's what God does. When God is always alluring, right? God's always trying to inspire us to make the best choices we can make with our lives. But when we get to the bottom line and the decision is made, here's how I imagine God acting. Utter humility. The utter humility of God before the greatest gift God gave us, which is our freedom. Our freedom even to turn away from God if we choose in freedom. That's who God is. And I'm telling you, if that's who God is, then it's time for us in our families, in our churches, in our nations, in our friendships, and at work, to learn how to respond to the free choices of others, even if we disapprove, even if we deep down believe they're hurting themselves. We can, like God, try to inspire them in another way. We can talk to them about it. We can share and express our concern. But even if we disagree, in the end, even with our children, in the end, you guys, we have to be like God. And before their decision, even if we're afraid they're hurting themselves, the truth is, we can only total humility before the greatest gift God gave them too, which is their freedom to even turn their back on us. As if to say, I respect you. I respect your freedom. More than I can say, I respect your freedom to make that decision. Even though I disagree with it, even though I think it may hurt you, I bow in love before your freedom. This gospel you just heard has Jesus being quoted as quoting. And what Jesus is quoting for us is the only law in all of Scripture that he held binding for himself and now for all of us. You shall love this God with all of your heart. And all of your heart means there's no room for any other or anything else to occupy all your heart. Just one who is oneness itself, who is love, who is the one who wills the good of the other as other than me, than I, than me. Only love can occupy our hearts, you see, if we love the one true God with all of our hearts. Only love. And it becomes the purpose of everything. This then is the only, and this only is the truth. The energy of self-emptying and self-giving love is God. That alone is God. No one woman in your life or mine, no one man, no one community, no one church. The Pope is not God. No one nation, even our own, no one beautiful planet called Earth, no combination of chemicals or new idea or philosophy. Psychology is not God. Science is not God. The CSC is not God. My spouse, my best friend is not God. My kids are not God. My job, my vocation is not God. And perhaps even most important, I am not God. Indeed, knowing now, knowing what's taken us millennia upon millennia to figure out, knowing what we know now about who God is, we join our voices with all of Islam and saying and praying day in and day out, especially when we're most tempted. There is no God but God.